Hello, I'd like to give you an update on the 2016 and 2017 season here at the Cravo Demonstration and Training Greenhouse in Culiacan, Mexico. This season we set out with three objectives. The first one was to transplant August the 15th, which is 2 to 6 weeks earlier than the local commercial farmers. The second objective was to determine the impact on timing and yield between young plants that were grown inside this retractable roof house in comparison to a conventional poly-covered nursery house. And the third objective is to do both an August 15th planting for extended winter production and a March 1st transplanting for extended summer production. So here on this side you can see we're preparing the house. They're just in the process of installing the stationary insect net since the pressures are really high through the summer here. So on the cucumbers, this is our second harvest cycle. We're growing 12 different varieties. We're growing Persians, European, and slicers. And there will be another planting happening March the 1st on the other side of the house. And there was no major problems experienced growing the cucumbers with the August 15th transplant, even though temperatures were 40 to 45 degrees Celsius and the relative humidity was sometimes over 80%. On the eggplant, we're growing 5 different varieties of eggplant, and again, there was no major challenges with the early transplanting. For the tomatoes, we are growing 36 different varieties: beef, Roma, and grape. And we are growing both indeterminate, semi-determinate, and determinate. Now with the early transplanting, we did have pollination challenges on the first 2 clusters, but only on the beef and Roma, and there were no pollination challenges on the grape tomatoes. And you can see that the plants are extremely clean, and considering that it's January the 5th, we can see how long these crops have been in production. Now when we look over here, you can see the peppers. We'll look at that again in a minute. And when we go down this line, if you look at the height changes on the right, you will see the difference between determinate and semi-determinate varieties. So one of the things we're trying to determine is in what situations is a semi-determinate better than a determinate in a retractable roof, both for summer and for winter cycles. Because in different countries like India or Australia, there may be situations where a determinate variety with multiple planting cycles may be a more profitable solution than to do a long cycle with strings. We also want to understand through the summer and winter the change in the plant structure in terms of the transpiration rate. So when the temperatures get high and the humidity gets low, this type of bush construction makes the plant more resistant to excessive transpiration, whereas when you have strings like this, when the high heat comes and the humidity drops, these plants will tend to run out of water faster.
Yep.
So here we can see that these plants here are getting much above the planting height, so even though they're growing really well, the height is really beyond the reach of the average person. So this type of system may not work as well if you're trying to do a multiple planting cycle. Here we have a determinate plant which is over 1 meter shorter, just due to the change in the growth habits. During when the first trusses were developing, it was still too hot for using bees, so we were using air blowers, but we still did not get sufficient pollination to avoid problems on the first 2 clusters. What's interesting is at the end of the last cycle in June, we still had 40-degree temperatures, but we did not have pollination problems. So we believe that we could avoid the pollination problems if the plants are bigger going into the heat, as opposed to starting with a young plant that's throwing its first flowers when the hot conditions have already arrived. Now, looking at the yield data, we've seen that when we are comparing the tomatoes that were grown with young plants in the retractable roof, the yield to date has been up to 100% higher than the yield from the young plants that were grown inside the conventional nursery house. Now, on the colored peppers, we have colored peppers, Lamullo, and mini bells. And this is a really good example of the change in the plant development between the young plants grown at a commercial nursery in comparison to the retractable roof. So these varieties here all came from young plants at a commercial nursery. And here we can see the change in the color of the strings, so we're at another variety, and these plants were now grown inside the retractable roof. When we look at the yield data to date, we can see that the average yield increase is approximately 50% more for the crops that have grown in the retractable roof. And we will be monitoring this, of course, through the entire season, and we will have data at the end of the season to give us the total comparisons in terms of yield per square meter. So going into the March 1st transplanting, which is only less than 2 months away, we will again be having cucumbers, tomatoes, colored bell peppers, and we will be growing this from March the 1st until the end of November. And we will determine what are the production protocols that we need to employ in order to manage those conditions of 40 to 45 degrees with both low humidity as low as 30% and humidity levels reaching 80 to 85%.